state, however, the stars were beautiful. She said, "Come look at the stars." And I of course followed her into the woods. But every time I walked to her, she walked farther away from me. She kept repeating over and over again, "Isn't this so much prettier than the city?" And walking away farther and farther. At this point, I started to get worried we would get lost, and she was still a good 10 to 15 feet away from me as she spoke. I told her, "We might get lost. Why don't we stick together or turn back soon?" At this point, she started to sound a little angry. "No, just follow me. We're almost there." She started to sound a little fishy, so I asked, "Where exactly are we going?" Her voice became almost robotically angry. "Why don't you just trust me?" It sounded like something my mom would say whenever I would ask something too many times. Almost like she could read my mind. She started walking more, expecting me to follow her. I did for a few steps, but the more I tried to trust her, the more worried I got. Here was the first why question. "Why are we even doing this?" I said. And there was no response, except for a grunt of some sort, like an annoyed grunt. "Jess?" And that's when I knew something was wrong. "Because I said so," she said, but it sounded like my mother, exactly like my mother. So extremely like my mother that for a millisecond I was relieved. But then I remembered my mother was not with us on this camping trip. "Mom?" I said, confused and scared now. I started backing away, and that thing started coming closer. "Hello? Who are you?" I said, starting to back away. "You know me," it said. It was switching between my mother and my cousin as I backed away. I have the worst sense of direction, so at this point, I had forgotten which way was back, but I ran. I ran in the opposite direction of the thing. I've never been an exceptional runner. In track, I always finished last. I never liked running, but here, I felt I was running faster than the fastest runner I knew. Nonetheless, I kept running. I heard a faint, "Come back, wait," behind me. But I didn't hesitate. I was like a scared dog, eyes ahead, full speed. The run back felt a lot longer than the walk to wherever we were. But soon, I saw some trees that I pulled dried leaves and sticks from earlier. I ran so fast to my tent and looked behind me. There was what either looked like 2 yellow eyes or a tiny car's headlights is the best I could describe it. It seemed to be standing still though. Almost tripping on the wooden platform, I went straight back into the tent and kicked off my shoes faster than ever before. When I looked back at what I previously mistook to be a lump of quilt, Jess was sleeping there the entire time. I was breathing extremely heavy, but I laid down closer to Jess than before, shivering. I remembered we were told strictly to not go outside our tents during the night, so I didn't tell her about what happened to avoid getting into trouble. Multiple times during the night, I heard different noises. At one point, I heard our car driving away, and even faintly, running somewhere in the distance. I chose not to pay attention to those noises though. In the morning, I was the last one to wake up. I woke up not thinking about the night prior, but thinking it was a nightmare or something. When I walked outside the tent though, my cousin's flashlight was on the floor, near where I had entered the woods. Also, my thrown shoes were not next to my cousin's, but where I threw them. I can't think of other proof that this wasn't a nightmare, but there was a dead squirrel near the car for some reason. Besides the horrible adventure that had happened throughout the night, the day went on as normal. I heard no noises or voices, but I did ask my cousin if she got up during the night. She said no, but I did wake her up a bit when I moved a bit close to her. She tried to forget about what happened, and soon, my thoughts were mostly about the lake we were swimming in. There was nothing sketchy about the lake. It was meant to be swam in, with beaches and lifeguards. After the beach, we got ice cream, ate at the picnic bench, and my other cousin taught me how to play a card game. Another strange thing though, my phone mysteriously disappeared during the night. It was not in the car when I checked, and it wasn't in the trunk after we pulled everything out. I was in 5th grade though, and it was just a small free phone my mother gave me to contact her. she wasn't too upset about the loss of this phone. After arriving back to the city, I didn't tell anybody about the experience until school started again. I told a friend or two in my class, but it wasn't mentioned again. The surreal, horrific experience was truly scary. My wife and I decided to go camping this past weekend. It was the first time we both had time off together in months, and wanted to spend it unplugged from the rest of the world, just the two of us. We chose a scenic spot in the North Georgia mountains, about a 2.5-hour drive from where we live in Atlanta. It wasn't too far out, but we'd heard from friends that once you get up into those hills, you feel completely isolated from the modern world. We both have been camping before, but it had been a while. I was in Boy Scouts, but I wouldn't call myself a natural in the wilderness. Despite our lack of survival skills, we ended up booking one of the park's backcountry sites. For those that may not know, that means you're more separated from the rest of the campers. There is no electricity or water, and you have to hike a fair bit to get there. You feel like you're really on your own that way. Our site, in particular, was very wooded and felt particularly isolating, in a good way. Or at least, that's what we thought at first. We got there early in the day because we wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to unpack and set up camp. We also wanted to get in some good hiking while there was plenty of daylight out. After several hours of hiking, we got back to our campsite around 7 p.m. It was really starting to get dark at this point, so we lit a campfire and made dinner. This is all sounding pretty normal, right? You're probably thinking, this is a pretty basic camping trip. Why did this guy post this here? Well, it wasn't until we turned in for the night that things started getting weird. It wasn't late when we went to bed, mainly because we were exhausted from the day, but also had an early start planned for the next. After a few uncomfortable hours trying to sleep in a small tent, not designed for my 6'3" frame, and my wife huddled next to me, I was awoken around 1 or 2 a.m. I don't know for sure because I was honestly too scared to check my phone for the time. There was a weird, sudden noise outside the tent. At first, I sort of just wrote it off as just some random animal running through the site. The initial high-pitched sound was far enough that I felt like I didn't need to worry. But then I noticed the sounds weren't leaving, and they weren't getting farther away. Suddenly, startling squeals interrupted by the sound of leaves being trampled, like something was running between our stuff, broke the sharp silence of the woods. So, at this point, I'm pretty awake. I laid there, still, wanting to make sure that whatever it was didn't get into any of our stuff, but also worried just enough to not dare reach for the zipper on our tent door. I started listening more closely and began to notice different variations and sounds. Like all of a sudden, all the movement would stop. I could hear light, slow sniffing, like it was trying to memorize our scent. I was getting used to the faint sniffing sound, only to be surprised by the sound of rushing, determined footsteps barreling toward the tent. They stopped just short of the spot where the top of my head grazed the tent wall. It started to sniff again. I could now feel something, its nose probably, pressing against the thin wall. Now that it was closer, I could sort of make out its size, about that of a large dog, like a German shepherd, maybe bigger. Maybe someone's dog got out and was running between campsites. Hard to tell while you're holding your breath and keeping one eye shut. Shuffled back quickly away from the tent, as if it had gotten a whiff of something it didn't like, possibly me. That's when it started growling. The growl is sort of hard to explain. It wasn't a dog, that's for sure. The best way I can describe it is like a cat who's pissed off, but much lower pitch. Too low, maybe for a cat. Almost like a guttural sounds of a wild hog, but even that wasn't quite right. Over and over it growled. At me. It felt like forever. Now my mind was racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I try and scare it? Make lots of noise? Maybe there's something in my tent I can grab and use as a weapon. I thought about everything within reach. My flashlight was within my finger's length, and my backpack against the wall by my feet. I knew I had a pocket knife in there, but I didn't think I'd be able to get it without making a lot of noise. Probably too much noise. The next few moments I think I will remember for the rest of my life. The creature started moving again, only this time, slowly. It circled the tent like a lion stalking its prey, stopping every once in a while to get a sniff here and there. I think it was getting its bearings, trying to figure out where the smell was strongest. It made a full circle right back to where my head was, pressed up against the wall. The growling sounded even more irritated, even more guttural. I knew my wife was awake now. I feel her hand working down my arm before wrapping her finger around my wrist in a death grip. It was then I realized the creature outside was now pressing against the wall. I could make out a shallow hole and points through the thin fabric. Teeth? Lots of them. It began to lick the tent wall, grazing its teeth on the fabric, like it just wanted a taste. The next thing that happened is the real reason I had to post here. After what felt like forever, the creature stopped. It stopped growling, stopped moving. For all I knew, it was just standing there outside the tent, thinking about its next move. I braced for something. I wasn't sure what, but I just continued lying there, waiting. Was it about to pounce? Was it done? As the seconds ticked on, my fear dissolved into anger. I was sick of lying there, simply wanting for something to happen to us. In a moment of dumb bravery, I grabbed my light and my backpack, thinking maybe I could use it as a shield, and ripped open the tent door. I stepped out and waved my light around the campsite. I saw nothing, not even a rustling of leaves in the distance, as if something was running away. I suddenly felt stupid. It had to have been some random animal I tricked myself into thinking was some sort of wilderness monster, rearing to eat me and my wife. I took one last look between the trees before turning around to get back in my tent. That's when I saw it. Right outside. Right where my head had been resting against the wall. Were footprints. Unmistakably human. The outdoors isn't something I would consider myself acquainted with. The potent air from the moist soil, the non-stop chirps of life in every nook and cranny, and the ambiguous emptiness I feel when I'm among the trees are things that do not suit my daily life, nor my personality. Exchange the damp soil, chirping life, and emptiness for the smell of carbon exhaust from a passing bus, the sound of commuters whistling through their morning walk, and the clear, overcrowded sight of a city street. And there you have my paradise. Growing up in the city injects thrill into every aspect of daily life. Danger, adventure, and plain adrenaline can lurk around every city block. The natural world simply cannot produce that same aspect of thrill in life. Not enough happens, not enough lurks in the corners of the thickets. That being said, I try staying away from nature as much as possible, remaining in the shadows of skyscrapers, rather than the shadows of oak. However, being 17 and living with my recently retired, high-ranked naval father who has more than enough experience and memories with the woods, my paradise couldn't be present at all times. This realization dawned on me when my father approached me to tell me we were spending a week in the cabin in the North Woods. Are you serious? My emotionally accurate thought was interrupted when my dad handed me an oversized suitcase to toss in the back of the car. You might want to grab a pillow for the ride. We have a long way to go, he said, smirking. This must be punishment for how late I came home from Stephanie's house last week, I thought to myself. Little did my father know, my tardiness was due to the curious nature I was born with. I was simply walking around the dark streets, exploring. Albeit, that may have been a rather dangerous and unintelligent venture, but no less filled with entertainment for myself. Punishment fits the not-so-crime-adjacent action, I guess. Nonetheless, we piled into the car and set off north. The drive was seemingly endless.
After about 7 hours, there was nothing but dense forest surrounding us. It wasn't long before we spent the rest of the drive on gravel road, tossing and shaking in the car in such a way that no fisherman would be able to resist motion sickness. Upon arrival, the sight of a very underkept, not so sturdy looking log cabin lay before us. Best home we could ask for out in these parts, huh bud? My father said in a slightly teasing tone. Oh, you bet. I'm thinking it took a fortune to build her, I said, rolling my eyes in resentment. After quickly unpacking the car and moving into our temporary home, my dad suggested we take a walk in the sea of surrounding pine and oak, with nothing to do other than staring at some truly talentless art hanging from the cabin walls. I accepted his request willingly, but not happily. As we plummeted into an endless abyss of trees, my comfort hastily left my being. Gone were the skyscrapers, the commuters whistling on their way to work, and the crowded, comforting city streets, only replaced with thick bark and, oddly, silence. There was no chirping, no singing of any life around us. In addition, I never truly felt empty or alone amongst the trees. Yes, my father was beside me, but there seemed to be something else present in the air. I couldn't quite put words to it. I pushed that to the far reaches of my mind. As we continued, I began to hear strange sounds from around us. They reminded me of the whistling commuters I encountered every day, but something was off. What is that? I asked my dad. That is just the wind in the trees, the leaves rustling, and the wood creaking. Almost sounds alive, doesn't it? He said. Sure, I said, trying to push back the paranoid feeling growing inside me. Our walk was short, only about an hour. I tried not to think about the sinister feeling I received from the trees, but every now and again, it would tiptoe into my conscious mind. I sat lying beside the fire in the dusty family room when my dad approached me saying he had to run into town to grab a few things. How long will you be? I asked. Oh, about a few hours or so. Unfortunately, the nearest town is about 50 miles from here, he said, sighing. And with that, he drove off to who knows whatever town would be in this barren wasteland. I sat watching the dancing flames of the family room fire for several minutes before boredom pulsed through every vein in my body. For some reason, my natural curiosity pushed into my mind and triggered my exploratory being. Why not go for a little midnight stroll? As I stepped down the stairs of the rear patio, I noticed that the forest was filled with the sounds of crickets, frogs, and basically anything that dwells in the mud. This was a pleasant surprise, but the empty, lonely aura surrounding me was not. What? You're going to be lonely no matter what until Dad gets back. Might as well explore. And with that thought, I set off for a little moonlight adventure. I never noticed how beautiful the natural world was, honestly. Everything was just so primal. The chirps of the crickets, the croaks of the frogs, the light of the fireflies briefly illuminating the area, and the wind in the trees. Wait, where was the whistling noise that accompanied the breeze earlier today? As if whatever higher power was out there was playing a sick joke on me, the orchestra of nature ceased. There was nothing but silence. Even the wind came to a halt, causing the leaves of the tree to sit motionless, hanging from their branches as if they were in the gallows. The only thing that remained were the fireflies, still blessing their surroundings with short bursts of light from their posterior. With the retreat of the sounds from the natural world came the approach of something more sinister. The approach of being accompanied by things that I simply could not lay my eyes on. As that feeling coursed through my body, the familiar sound of whistling filled my ears. I didn't know whether to act on my fight-or-flight instinct, so I merely stood still, waiting. The whistling grew louder and louder, coming from all directions, as it felt as if something was whistling directly into my ear. The fireflies shined on something. It was only for a second or two, but I could have sworn it was a person. Relief filled my body as I felt more safe with another person being around, but that ignorant feeling quickly faded. What would another person be doing so far out here, and why would they be following me? That thought died as soon as the fireflies illuminated once more. It was not a person. Whatever was standing a few feet away from me, in the shadows, didn't look like something God would have created. It had the figure of a humanoid being, but its limbs were elongated and bent at unnatural angles. Atop its disfigured, human-like body was a round head that housed two sunken, pale eyes, and a gaping maw filled with needle-pointed teeth. However, that was the only one that stood directly before me. There were others. I couldn't see them fully, but their awful silhouettes sickened me to the point where I desired no further physical details of their appearance. Still frozen in some sort of shock, the closest being crept closer and closer. As it got a few inches away from my body, it let out a loud, familiar whistle through its open, grinning mouth. As if some sort of electrical shock pulsed through my body, I suddenly threw myself into an all-out sprint towards the cabin, with the whistlers in close proximity. I hadn't realized how far I walked out into these woods, but the approximately 15-minute sprint gave me an idea. As the cabin lights filled my vision, I looked back to see my pursuers were about 50 feet behind me, and there were too many of them to count. They ran in such unnatural ways that the mere sight of it made me nauseous. I practically broke down the back door of the cabin. After bursting through, I managed to close the door and lock it behind me. I quickly did so with each door and window throughout the cabin, then barricaded myself in the upstairs closet, waiting for my dad to get home, and hopefully get me out of this hell he put me into. All I could do is sit and try to keep quiet. I heard thumps and scratches coming from the ceiling, most likely from those things crawling on the roof. The whistling never stopped. It was a constant reminder of the creature's presence. I sat in fear for what felt like an eternity, until the whistlers erupted into what sounded like crackling, maybe laughter. Shortly after they began their unnatural course of laughter, silence tore through the place, leaving a stale, sinister sense in my ears. Maybe it's safe to come out. Maybe they got bored, or just simply couldn't get into the house. As I was about to open the closet door, a familiar sound echoed from the back of my closet. I wasn't in the city, so that whistling wasn't coming from a commuter. For starters, we both work at a hospital and work until 1 a.m. This all happened about 2 weeks ago. We worked a 12-hour shift due to our departments being slightly understaffed for the night. We're leaving the hospital around 4 in the morning. We usually take the highway, but the on-ramp was closed due to an accident. So, we decided to just take the normal roads home. It was going well for the first 30 minutes, until we get to the part of the trip where the once touching residential houses became nothing but woods. The speed limit was 25 because it was still residential. There was probably one house every 2 miles. My girlfriend and I were talking about new music and having a nice time when I got this awful feeling I'm being watched. I looked into the back seat, feeling like I would 100% see a person sitting back there. I start observing the tree line to my right and see nothing. Then it happens. We slam into a deer running on the left side of the road from the woods. My girlfriend screams and I start looking around to see what just happened. I see the back legs of a deer stumble away before getting distracted by my girlfriend, shaking me, asking me what just happened. I told her, "You just hit a deer," and was forced outside to see the damage on her car because she was too afraid to leave. I open the door and go into the front of the car to look at the grill. I can't see anything due to her headlights still being on. I flick my wrist to signal her to shut off the headlights. I turn my phone light on and turn my head to where the deer ran off to. My girlfriend turns off the headlights, and perfectly where I was looking, I see a set of glowing eyes in the tree line, standing at the height a deer's eyes would be. I look away to see if there's any damage. We were only going 25, so it was just a small piece of the grill was broken off. I give her the thumbs up and start walking back to the passenger door. I grab the handle and decide to give the deer one last look and see the same set of glowing eyes, but now standing about 6 feet. My heart sinks deep and I get into the car. I tell my girlfriend there was minimal damage and to just drive. She kept asking questions, and I wasn't ready to tell my girlfriend, who gets extremely scared very easily, that I saw the deer we hit, standing and watching us. She asks how the deer was, and I said, "You were going slow and lightly tapped it. I saw it walk off, and it was fine." I also worked in that there wasn't any blood on the ground or on the car. She finally takes off, and I feel 100% safer. Something tells me to look back using the side mirror. I glance into the mirror and slide down into my seat so I could see the deer. It was no longer standing in the tree line, but in the middle of the road. I see it in her back lights, and I could see that it's not a deer. In the red glow, I saw a very tall man in very little or worn clothing. My heart must have skipped a beat. It was just staring with its piercing yellow eyes, looking at me. I didn't say a word to my girlfriend the whole way home, and haven't since. We drove in silence for about 30 minutes or so until we got home. Then she starts saying how lucky we were. I was asking her why she said that, thinking she would know what I just saw. She says it could have rolled up on the hood and into the windshield. I breathe a sigh of relief. We get out and start looking at the car. The grill had more damage than I remember seeing, but it wasn't too bad. I apparently missed seeing a thick branch in the grill. My girlfriend takes it out and throws it on the ground like it's nothing. But I'm thinking to myself, why would a deer have a stick on them? Or how would they, is the better question. We go inside and start making dinner. The image of that thing's eyes are burned into my every thought. I try to stay focused, but can't. I excuse myself to the restroom and take out my phone. I start looking up its features and compared what happened to me to other people's stories. I had a hunch it was a skinwalker, but being an avid scary story reader, I never assumed they're true until that night. I let it go, and thankfully, my girlfriend and I were left unharmed and got home safely. I'm still thinking about it today and feel so unsettled.